Hello and welcome. In this video, I will be discussing the first half of Task A, which covers pilot qualifications. I will cover the certification requirements, recent flight experience, record keeping, and privileges and limitations of a private pilot. I will also cover how you can study these topics for your oral exam. I hope you're ready. I'm excited. Let's begin. There are 4 regulations that determine whether or not a student pilot is eligible to take the private pilot check ride. They can be found under Part 61 of the FAR. I'll break each one down as I go along. The first regulation is 61.103. This regulation determines eligibility. It states that an applicant must be at least 17 years old, proficient in English, and they must have an endorsement in their logbook certifying that they have completed 61.105 and 61.107. (61.105) discusses your aeronautical knowledge. You can think of this as the ground schooling you should have done with your CFI. This includes, but is not limited to, discussions about VFR flight planning, solving weight and balance problems, and learning about aeronautical decision making. Your CFI will include a written endorsement in your logbook certifying that you have completed this ground instruction. The next regulation is 61.107, which covers flight proficiency. You can think of the regulation 61.107 as your flight training that you have done with your CFI. This includes things like takeoffs and landings, slow flight installs, and emergency procedures. This is the stuff that you have learned in the airplane. You will receive an endorsement from your CFI certifying that you've completed all the flight training. The final regulation pertaining to your eligibility as a student is flight experience, or 61.109. (61.109) covers your aeronautical experience. There is a certain number of minimum hours you need to have spent in an airplane. This includes, but is not limited to, 40 hours total time in an airplane and 10 hours of pilot and command time. These 4 regulations cover the requirements you need to meet before you go into your private pilot check ride. There are 2 regulations that are important to note when discussing recent flight experience. The first one is 61.57, which discusses the flight experience you need to have in order to carry passengers. (61.57) states that if you want to be pilot in command of an aircraft that is carrying passengers, you need to conduct 3 takeoffs and landings within the past 90 days, and you need to have been the sole manipulator of the controls. There are a few additional requirements depending on the type of flight you are conducting. If the flight is to be conducted in a tailwheel aircraft, these takeoffs and landings need to have taken place in a tailwheel aircraft. They also need to have come to a full stop. If the flight is planned to occur during nighttime, then you need to have completed 3 takeoffs and landings during the time period that is 1 hour after sunset until 1 hour before sunrise. Additionally, those takeoffs and landings need to come to a full stop. Finally, if a class or type rating is required, the takeoffs and landings need to have been done in an aircraft that is of the same category, class, and type. The next regulation that is important when it comes to recent flight experience is 61.56, which discusses flight reviews. 61.56 discusses flight reviews. It states that every pilot needs to conduct a flight review every 24 calendar months. A flight review consists of 1 hour of ground training and 1 hour of flight training with a CFI. After completion of the flight review, a CFI will give you an endorsement in your logbook certifying that you have completed a flight review. There are a few ways a pilot can bypass a flight review. A pilot can bypass a flight review if within the past 24 calendar months they have received a new certification, rating, or operational privilege. 61.51 outlines what the FAA wants pilots to keep a record of. It states that pilots must keep a record of any flight training they receive and any flight time they use to meet the recent flight experience regulation. The regulation goes on to state the details in which a pilot must include in their records. Finally, I will be discussing the privileges and limitations you have as a private pilot that are outlined in the Regulation 61.113. This regulation states that no person who holds a private pilot license may act as pilot in command of an aircraft that is carrying passengers or property for hire. Now, with this rule, there are 6 exceptions. The first exception is that a private pilot may be compensated by a business for a flight if that flight is incidental to the business, and that flight doesn't carry any passengers or property. The second way a private pilot can be compensated is for participating in search and rescue operations. They can be compensated by a local, state, or federal agency. The third way a private pilot can be compensated is if they participate in a nonprofit or community flight event. The fourth way a private pilot can be compensated is if they participate in glider tow operations, and the fifth way they can be compensated is if they participate in the production of a light sport aircraft. Finally, the sixth way a private pilot can be compensated is if they are an aircraft salesman with 200 hours of pilot in command time. Then they can be compensated for doing a demonstrative flight with a prospective buyer. Finally, and most importantly, a private pilot cannot accept any more than a pro rata share from his or her passengers for the expenses of a flight. This means that if you are going for a flight with a friend, they cannot pay you more than half of the flight's expenses. This includes the aircraft rental, landing fee, fuel, and oil that may be required for your flight. Once again, that means they cannot pay you for the total flight expenses. You still have to pay your fair share. I hope this helps. Now, I will be discussing how I studied for this portion of the oral exam. Unfortunately, Task A is very regulation heavy, and therefore I had to rely on my memory in order to process all this information. The first thing I did was I sat and read through, painfully, the FAR. After I had read the FAR, I then wrote out my own personal definition of what each regulation meant, so that I could practice explaining it back to the examiner. Once I had my own personal definition, I combined the location of the regulation with my definition of the regulation on a flashcard. For example, on the front of the flashcard, it would say 61.113, which I now know covers the privileges and limitations of a private pilot. Then on the back, it would state that a private pilot cannot accept money for hire. It would then also list the 6 exceptions and the pro rata share that I must pay as a pilot. Going back and forth allowed me to memorize where each regulation was and what it meant to me. This means that if you get asked a question, for example, what are the privileges and limitations of a private pilot, and you don't know, you know that 61.113 covers it, and you can just flip to your FAR in your check ride. Albeit, you don't want to be doing that throughout your check ride, as it can seem as though you're unprepared. Now, I will be going through a few questions you can expect on your check ride so that you can get an idea of how you need to answer and what you need to study for your oral exam. The first question an examiner may ask you is, what do you need to be current to fly yourself? The answer to this question is that you need to have completed a flight review within the past 24 calendar months. This can be substituted if within the past 24 calendar months you've gotten a new certification, rating, or operational privilege. Now, an examiner may ask, what do you need to be current to fly a friend? This depends. If you're flying the friend during the daytime, you only need 3 takeoffs and landings within the past 90 days. If you're flying the friend at night, then you need to have completed those takeoffs and landings to a full stop during the period that's 1 hour after sunset and 1 hour before sunrise. An examiner may ask you, what is the difference between currency and proficiency? And this is a very important question. I define currency and proficiency as being the difference between being legal to fly and being safe to fly. I'm a new pilot. I don't have much experience. I can technically go 90 days from flying to flying a new passenger, but it isn't safe for me to go flying after 90 days with a new passenger. I'd probably go find a CFI, do a quick lesson, and then fly my friend. Finally, you may be asked, if you're flying a friend, can they pay for your flight? And unfortunately, the answer is no. Your friend cannot pay the total expense of your flight, as you have to pay your pro rata share. I know it's expensive, but those are the rules. I hope this video helps, and I'll see you in the next one.